Why is a basketball game 48 minutes long? Why are there exactly 18 holes in golf? Why do football teams get 4 downs? None of these rules were chosen by accident. Some of them were built on purpose by people trying to solve a very specific problem. How do you keep a paying crowd from getting bored? Others turned out to be historical accidents that happened to work so well nobody ever changed them back. Either way, the rulebook you're watching right now isn't neutral. It's been quietly engineered, tweaked and rewritten for almost a century to squeeze out more drama than the raw competition would ever produce on its own. This is the hidden science behind every sport you watch. And by the end of this video, you'll never look at a shot clock, a set of downs, or a scorecard the same way again. Let's start with the clearest example in all of professional sports, because it isn't a theory, it's math, written down on a napkin by a man who was watching his own league die in front of him. By 1954, professional basketball had a problem nobody wanted to say out loud. The games were unwatchable, not occasionally, constantly. In 1950, the Fort Wayne Pistons beat the Minneapolis Lakers 19-18. That's not a quarter, that's a full game. Teams had figured out the simplest strategy in the sport. Grab a small lead, then just hold the ball. There was no rule forcing anyone to shoot, so they didn't. Players would stand in a corner, clutching the basketball, while the other team fouled them over and over just to get it back, and fans in the arena openly booed and walked out. The New York Times reported that professional basketball's entire existence was in jeopardy. Not a bad season, its existence. Danny Biasono, who owned the Syracuse Nationals, thought he had the fix. He sat down with box scores from the league's most exciting games and noticed something. When a game felt fast and fun, each team was taking around 60 shots. So he did the arithmetic. A basketball game runs 48 minutes, or 2,880 seconds. 2 teams, 60 shots each, is 120 shots total. Divide 2,880 by 120. That's it. That's the whole discovery. 24 seconds per possession, or a team has to give up the ball. It wasn't a guess. It was a deliberate calibration. An attempt to find the exact number that balanced offensive freedom against the pressure to actually do something with it. Too short, and the game turns into frantic chaos. Too long, and stalling creeps right back in. Biasone pitched it to the other owners. They tested it in a gym at a local school that summer, and the league adopted it for the 1954-55 season. The results weren't subtle. Scoring jumped from 79.5 points a game to 93.1 in a single season. Field goal attempts climbed from 75.4 to 86.4 per team. And fan interest, which had been bleeding out for years, came roaring back almost immediately. Teams couldn't hide anymore. Every possession had a deadline, which meant every possession had tension. And tension is exactly what a league in danger of dying needed to sell tickets again. Basketball wasn't made more exciting by accident. It was made more exciting by a man doing division on the back of a box score. Football's answer to the same problem came 70 years earlier, and it came from the opposite direction. Basketball's issue was teams holding the ball forever on offense. Football's issue was teams holding the ball forever by refusing to ever lose it. In the late 1800s, football was barely distinguishable from rugby. There was no rule requiring a team to actually advance the ball. Princeton figured that out before anyone else did. And in games against Yale in 1880 and 1881, they simply kept possession the entire match, running out the clock without ever seriously trying to score. It wasn't against the rules. It was just boring, and it worked. Walter Camp, the Yale man who ended up rewriting most of football's early rulebook, pushed through a fix in 1882. A team now had 3 downs to gain 5 yards, or the ball went over to the other side. For the first time, football had a clock ticking inside every single possession, not measured in minutes, but in downs and yards. That number kept getting adjusted for decades. In 1888, the required distance actually shifted to losing 10 yards instead of gaining 5, an odd rule that got reversed by 1904. By 1906, the distance settled at 10 yards to gain instead of 5. By 1912, the league finally landed on 4 downs instead of 3. Camp's own reasoning, argued repeatedly in front of skeptical committees, was that teams needed to be forced into a more open, more imaginative style of play, instead of just grinding the ball up the middle over and over between the tackles. Here's the part that actually matters, though. That system didn't just stop stalling. It manufactured suspense out of nothing, on purpose, every single set of downs. 4th and 1 isn't dramatic because of what's happening on the field. It's dramatic because a rule, written and rewritten between 1882 and 1912, decided exactly how much risk a team is allowed to take before the ball changes hands. Take away the down system, and there's no such thing as should they go for it. There's just football. The down system is what turns every set of 4 plays into its own miniature countdown, complete with its own decision point and its own consequence. Now here's the twist, because not everything in the rulebook was built this deliberately. Golf has 18 holes. Every course on Earth, every tournament, 18, always. You'd assume that number was chosen for the same reason as the shot clock, some careful calculation about pacing and tension. It wasn't. It was basically an accident. The old course at St. Andrews, the birthplace of golf, originally had 22 holes laid out along a narrow strip of coastal land, players going out along the same path and coming back along it. In 1764, the club simply decided several of those holes were too short and combined them, which brought the course down to 18. There was no science behind it, no committee studying drama or suspense or ideal round length. St. Andrews was simply the most influential club in the sport, so when other courses started copying its layout out of respect rather than calculation, 18 holes became the default, and the default eventually hardened into a rule nobody ever seriously questioned again. Golf's most famous number wasn't engineered, it just won by reputation. And yet, even an accidental number ends up shaping drama anyway. 18 holes is long enough for a bad front nine to matter, and a great back nine to erase it completely, which is exactly the shape of nearly every unforgettable final round in the sport's history. The collapse and the comeback both given just enough room to actually happen inside a single day. Nobody designed that on purpose. It just turned out that an arbitrary Scottish decision from 1764 happened to produce almost the perfect length for a comeback, short enough to fit into a single afternoon, long enough that no single hole can fully define the outcome on its own. Sometimes the drama isn't manufactured. It's just a lucky accident that never got fixed. Tennis didn't get so lucky, which is exactly why it eventually had to engineer its own solution. For most of tennis's history, a set had no upper limit at all. You had to win by 2 clear games, and if neither player could pull ahead, the set just continued, game after game, with no mechanism anywhere in the rulebook to force a resolution. In 1969, at Wimbledon, a first-round match between Pancho Gonzalez and Charlie Pasarell stretched to 112 games and had to be finished over 2 separate days, players stopping not because the match reached a natural conclusion, but because it got too dark to keep playing. That's not an outlier story. That's a structural flaw sitting right at the center of the sport. Without any kind of limit, a tennis match could theoretically never end at all. In 1970, an American named Jimmy Van Allen pushed a fix that the sport had resisted for years, largely because tennis traditionalists considered the idea of a sudden death shootout almost beneath the dignity of the game: the tiebreak. Once a set reaches 6 games apiece, instead of playing on indefinitely, the players switch to a sudden, condensed shootout. First to 7 points, win by 2. The US Open adopted it that same year. Wimbledon eventually followed, though it took years of resistance before the sport's most traditional tournament finally gave in. The tiebreak didn't just prevent marathon matches. It created an entirely new category of drama the sport never had before: a guaranteed pressure point, built directly into the structure of every single set, where a handful of points decides something enormous in a matter of minutes instead of hours. Before 1970, tension in tennis built up slowly, over dozens of games, rising and falling with the rhythm of the match. After 1970, the sport had a mechanism that could manufacture unbearable tension on command, every single time a set got close, on a schedule the sport itself now controlled instead of leaving it up to chance. And leagues haven't stopped doing this, not even close. In 2023, Major League Baseball introduced a pitch clock, forcing pitchers to deliver the ball within a strict time limit or face a penalty, and forcing batters to be ready to hit within their own window too. Baseball, a sport with no game clock at all, one of the only major sports where a team is never technically out of time as long as it still has outs remaining, had developed the opposite problem from basketball in the 1950s. Games weren't too fast, they were too slow, stretching well past 3 hours as pitchers paced around the mound. Batters stepped out to adjust their batting gloves between every single pitch, and long stretches of the game passed with almost nothing actually happening on the field. The fix worked almost immediately. The pitch clock trimmed the average game length by roughly half an hour in its very first season, and attendance and engagement numbers climbed right along with it. It did it for the exact same reason Danny Biasone did his division problems 70 years earlier: a league watching its own pacing become the enemy of its own drama, deciding to rewrite the rule instead of hoping the problem fixed itself. Different sport, different decade, different specific fix, but the same underlying diagnosis every single time. Dead time kills drama, and somebody eventually has to be willing to legislate the dead time out of existence. So here's what actually connects the shot clock: the down system, the tiebreak, and the pitch clock. Even though they were invented in 4 different decades by 4 completely different people solving 4 completely different problems, every one of them exists because raw competition, left alone, doesn't automatically produce drama. Sometimes it produces exactly the opposite: a team hoarding the ball for an entire quarter, a match that refuses to end even after 2 days and 112 games, a pitcher stalling on the mound for no reason at all. Left to its own devices, a sport can accidentally engineer boredom just as easily as it can produce a classic. Somebody has to notice when that's happening, and somebody has to be willing to rewrite the rulebook to fix it. Usually over the objections of traditionalists who insist the old way was fine. And even when a number wasn't invented for that reason at all. The way golf's 18 holes simply won out by historical accident 300 years ago, it still ends up shaping the tension of the game anyway, whether anyone planned it or not. The rulebook doesn't need to be perfectly engineered to create drama. Sometimes it just needs to survive long enough for the drama to find it. So the next time you're watching a basketball team hold for the last shot of a close game, or a football team facing 4th and 1 with the season on the line, or a tennis player serving down set point in a tiebreak, or a pitcher racing the clock with the bases loaded, remember that none of that pressure exists by nature. It exists because somebody, at some point, sat down with a stopwatch, a box score, or a stubborn refusal to let a sport die, and built it that way, one rule, one number, one deadline at a time. None of these rules were chosen by accident, and now you know exactly which ones were, and which ones just got lucky.